All praise be to the glory, power, dominion, majesty of God, the God of Israel. The God of Israel is real, and I was explaining that that's his pun, that's the irony of his humor, how when he makes himself known to the world like the waters covering the sea on the day of anguish, on the day of the Lord, he will punish the earth for their iniquity, and you'll see that he's a person with this humor, like using the word the God of Israel is real. That's the code that he's been using all along, in many ways evangelizing himself, proving that he's real. But again, because this is Homo Satan's world, it's bathed in this sin, which is like this invisible ink. We really can't believe that God exists. And since he's been hiding since the golden calf fiasco at Mount Horeb, notice the word Horeb is like horrible. It's like horoneum. So every word that he conjures and has rendered has a meaning and a meaning that fits in the gematria of the universe that he's created. And the universe has been founded on wisdom. God founded the universe on wisdom. So this is what I have to convey to you. The world is ending. God will consume the earth. He will destroy Satan's earth, and he will do a new thing, as he says in Isaiah. And we're going to resume with Isaiah 15 in a minute, please. There's some things I wanted to address that I said, I think, erroneously in the last video. Notice that the word terror is error with T, the cross T. And God tells you that he will meditate terror, and he will lob the bow with terror. So it's coming. I promise you it's going to happen. His mighty arm will come out of the sky. You see that the world is conducting to World War III now, the final war, Armageddon. Gog, Magog, it all correlates. Russia will draw the United States into war, and this will be the final war. And people say, well, how can it take place if I, the Christ, am not in Jerusalem now? God says he will do a new thing. He will make waters and streams. He will merge them. He will reconfigure the world for this final day when he makes himself known. And it's coming very soon. Look at the volcanoes. Look at the earthquakes and the frequency of the earthquakes. Look at how many there are. Everything that God predicted in the Bible and through me in Revelation is coming to pass now. Again, the mind is bathed in this satanic cesspool water that makes us really unable to fully believe in God, although we know deep down he exists. He lives in our hearts and our minds, and we say the word God all the time. And as I said in that other video, where do you think that word came from? We know it exists. We know he is real. So in the last video, I talked about I could not explain the fact that God was conflicted. But that's not really true, because his conflicted nature is the result of this draconian, garbled contract with these envious, self-destructive retards, Samjazer and Azazel, that were these fallen angels who saw women and their beautiful hair and wanted to rape them and did rape them, and spawned and engendered this race of giants that used to rule the world. So we see that God's conflicted nature, the reason why he has to punish, is actually because of a legal family contract that God, under duress, in his infinite mercy and much to his regret, his everlasting regret, as you can imagine, agreed to. He said that I would be afflicted a certain amount, and he allowed this, and now regrets it. Again, we know from the Bible that God regrets things and many times repents and changes his mind. For instance, with Hezekiah, he's going to kill Hezekiah, and Hezekiah begs him and says, God, I've been a good servant. And God says, okay, I'll give you 20 more years. So we know that God's a person, and he can be convinced of things. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the narcissist. We're all narcissists. That's the nature of man because of Satan, who's the ultimate narcissist, who thought he could rise above the Most High in the habitation of the clouds and the congregation in the north, rise above this creature, God, the creature who created him, Satan. He thought he could outdo God. And God tells us in Isaiah that, can the clay say to the potter, why hast thou made me thus? We are God's clay, and hence the pun clay, meaning death, that Joyce makes in his short story, Clay, which God wrote because God writes everything. Everything you see is God, and that's, I think, the central concept. Another central concept that you see every bird that chirps, God's speaking that into existence. Maschiach, meaning God who speaks the world into existence. This is his movie, this is his script, and he's speaking it in real time and also in past time. And again, when you say that Satan will be destroyed forever and burned forever in the lake of fire until the end of time, yes, but time again is one of God's many inventions. One arrow in his quiver. In his quiver hath he hid me like a polished shaft. And when I was little, I was obsessed with the word shaft. Again, that's predictive programming. Everything God predicts comes to pass. And that's when I say that the world was created for and through me. There is little bits of everything of me in the world. And you notice that my eyes are the color of olives, like the olive branch that I am, for a reason. All of this is coalescing now and coming to pass. I, as God's Christ, being made perfect through suffering, humility before honor, and I suffered in the desert for all these horrible things I did. And I wanted to apologize, although I know it's really unforgivable for making all these horrible videos and saying all these horrible things about people, thinking I was justified, and that I, as his Christ, could do these things. Like all the saints, God deludes us with evil spirits into committing these terrible crimes so he can humble us, because the curse causeless does not come as per the law and the prophets. When one suffers, God, because of this draconian contract, has to punish it for a sin. So every sin that I've done comes back to me, and that's how God has made me perfect. Not yet, but he's making me perfect through this terrible suffering. So again, I want to apologize for making those horrible, shameful videos that, of course, came back to haunt me. And I was thinking, I was getting up in the morning to make these videos as if it were my job, as in Job, which is originally spelled with 2 J's. As St. Peter had pointed out to me when I was making these videos, he said, don't do this, Nick. This is horrible. Do unto others as they would do unto you, which is God's golden rule, the law and the prophets. But because I was deluded, because God had deluded me with these evil spirits, I was making these videos and breaking the law of God by hurting others, thinking I, as his Christ, was alone and justified. But every man, because I'm only a man, I'm Clark Kent, not Superman, every man God will render according to his works. It will come back to you, every sin you commit. I have to tell you over and over again, stop committing sins. Stop using profanity. Stop cursing. It's called cursing for a reason. You're cursing yourself when you use profanity. Every S word, every F word, God will remind you of on the day of vengeance. And those of us, the 7 or 8 people who watch these videos, we are fortunate, although it doesn't seem like it in this life, which is just a breath and a shadow. We think that we're, how horrible it is, but we are actually unspeakably, by providence, fortunate through God to have been given this knowledge, because 99.9, the satanic number, % of the Earth's population are going to be astounded, confused, confounded, and howling in terror when God takes vengeance and punishes the world on this day that is coming very soon. So God, again, must in this, I'm reading from my notes, so I'm not looking at the camera. God must in this perverse world break the heart of man in order to give his saints new hearts. Literally, You think of Saul, who becomes Paul. He was killing Christians, and as Paul says in his Gospels, by the grace of God, he is who he is. So there's that polarital irony that God uses, proving again that he's a person with humor, with this brutally ironic humor. That's how he functions. And if you don't like it, it doesn't matter. He's God. And this is the person that created the world and the universe and the heavens, and he's in charge. Just as I'm his Christ, this terribly flawed, sinful, worthless piece of scum, like all of us compared to God, who is perfect. And I'm just a person. He chose me. That's all I can say. Moses, the same thing. And think of how envious everyone was of Moses, even his brother and sister. Aaron and Miriam betrayed him and tried to take over his power, because envy is the motivating factor in this accursed world. Through the devil's envy, death came into the world. We're all envious. That's really the only emotion we have. Yes, we have love, we have fear, but envy is the root of this all. So, again, think of God's saints. Even the saints are filth in God's eyes. Joseph, who is haughty, like the daughters of Zion. Joseph is very haughty and tells his brothers, he's above them and they're going to be bowed down to him, and they hate him for it, and he's wrong to do it, and he suffers horribly. Joseph is, the Egyptians put his legs in iron and they hurt his feet, and he's in prison for many years, but then God redeems him and he's rewarded. So patience, the patience of the saints. Think of Jacob, what a horrible life Jacob led until God made him Israel, and how he suffered. Think of Laban torturing Jacob, changing his wages every day. His word meant nothing. Laban, the word of God. Think of that word, like labia. He was obsessed with his daughters, Laban, and he was just giving lip service. His promises meant nothing. Laban. So again, we see the word of God operating on many levels. So again, back to the narcissist. We are all narcissists, but the essential narcissist wants to create and wants to be an artist, but really can't write and can't create because the narcissist cannot see himself objectively. And the narcissist will write fiction as if it's a diary, a journal entry about his life. And when I was teaching fiction, God graced me with that blessing, in which I ruined with these stupid adulterous affairs, ruined the whole thing with flirting with my students and having these affairs. It all came back to me. But when I was teaching, I would see that 99.9% of the students would write like a journal entry as if it were fiction, thinking that their mundane life was something that people would want to read because they can't step out of themselves. The narcissist can't. And everybody, of course, wants to write and be a novelist, but it takes that objectification of oneself to step outside of oneself. When I first wrote my first published novel, A Thing or Two About Cursing and Camilla, it was just like this solipsistic, whiny journal entry, and I only was able to make it succeed when I saw the character based on me objectively and could make fun of myself ironically. Ironic, like God irons us, he steals us with this brutal humor. So the narcissist thinks only of itself, and it has really no story to tell, but it writes a continual diary entry about itself. But remember, the job of the artist is to entertain. I wanted to talk a little bit about prayer. Prayer is the only prayer that's really relevant, is the Our Father prayer, because we're not forcing our words into God's mouth. We're not putting words into God's mouth. We're saying, thy will be done, as it is in heaven, as it is in the earth. So prayer is about listening. It's not about superimposing our own desires onto God. It's about listening to what he wants. And if we are reading the word of God, he'll start speaking to us. But if we're not reading the Bible or listening to it, Satan will take over our prayers and delude us into thinking that our prayers are valid. For years I was praying and thinking that I was getting what I wanted, but I was getting what Satan wanted. And I was destroying myself by hurting other people. And that's the worst thing. It's even worse than hurting ourselves is when we hurt others. So about 5 months ago, I woke up to this horrible nightmare of what I'd done. And God took everything away from me for this. But because he's the God of redemption, and he really is, he forgives those who have real contrition, and he forgives those whose hearts he breaks. Humility before honor. And I wanted to say this anecdote about, it's convoluted and complicated, but I think it'll further prove that I'm his Christ. When I was in the desert, living in this RV in the California desert, this New York Jew, everybody hated me. I was still haughty, and at night the wind would be so fierce that I would go into the shed that I had built for solace, and it was this little shed, and I was in the shed, crying and asking God, how could all of my riches have come to this? And the name of the shed maker was Tough Shed. And God was like, yeah, you're shedding your own skin. You're shedding like a guitarist sheds to get better. And I was shedding my reptilian skin like a snake. And I was, of course, because it's impossible for my mortal, worthless, stupid brain to believe that I'm the Christ also. And I kept saying to God, how is it possible that I'm your Christ? Like David says to God in the Psalms, he says, what am I? Like, who am I that you picked me? God has to pick someone. And I have a lot of the characteristics of David. I modeled on him from the house of David: a poet, a womanizer, a singer, a writer, and an adulterer. And I said to God, am I going to burn, in hell? And God said, no. He said, even David saw corruption, but I will not see corruption. And then I said to God, I'm living in this shotgun shack. And I saw that it was this echo in reference to the song by the Talking Heads, like this Talking Head, because everything is tied together, where David Byrne says, you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack in another part of the world, where I was, another part of the world. I was in this desert in California, Desert Hot Springs, where the Illuminati killed Marilyn Monroe. Really the most bleak place, where the wind is all there is. It's wind and confusion, as God tells us in Isaiah. He says your idols are wind and confusion. And I was in this shed, and I was weeping, and God said, yeah, you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack. David Byrne. David Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, and also David Byrne. And he said, you will not burn, but David burned. Even David saw corruption. And I remember once I was walking with a Frenchman in Soho, and he said, look at this loft, look at this brownstone. Who lives here? Probably someone cool like David Byrne. Again, that's predictive programming. Every word that's uttered in one's life is part of this grand scheme that God's created, and it's all going to coalesce on the day of anguish. So there I was in that shotgun shack, that tough shed, finding myself living in a strange part of the world, and God reminded me of when he had cursed me with amoebic dysentery. When I got my first record deal, I got this big record deal, and I thought I was so cool, but I'd been horribly behaving, sleeping with groupies and doing drugs and just acting like an arrogant creep, like the creeping thing. And God cursed me with this amoebic dysentery. So I never enjoyed any of that fame. I was touring, and I should have been happy, but as if you have ever seen the Tonight Show video where I'm on Jay Leno, I weigh 150 pounds, and I'm 5'11", almost 6 foot. Then I was 6 foot, but I've shrunk in my horrible old age to 5'11", and 6 foot, like 6 feet under. God made me exactly that height. And I went to this Dr. Hoffman, which was this holistic doctor that was on Park Avenue South, a great doctor, along with Dr. Levin right near there. And I was going there for these vitamin drips and to get rid of these parasites, which I eventually did by the grace of God. And I remember the receptionist, actually it was Dr. Hoffman's wife, said, oh, she looked at my profile that I just filled out, and she said, oh, you're a musician. She said, we also treat David Byrne. There was predictive programming. God was laying this, planting the seed of Israel, of David, right then. And I said, oh yeah, David Byrne, the Talking Heads, not thinking, of course, that 30 years later, all of this would come to fruition, bearing poison fruit. So I'm in that shack, weeping, begging God to tell me if I really am the Messiah and what's going to become of me. And he reveals all this in this anecdote to me about David burned, and I'm the seed of David, etc. So I hope that was not so garbled, that anecdote. I wanted to talk a little bit about the satanic deceivers. They always pretend that the past doesn't matter. They say, oh, it's a new day, move forward. But the past matters, of course. That's why God causes us to sin, so we can hearken back to the past. That's why God has constructed time in this linear continuum, because God wants us to look back continually on our sins to remind us not to do them. And the Satanist pretends the past doesn't matter because they don't want the truth. But God tells us that he requireth that which is past. The past is instructive. And people say, oh, I deserve this. You notice now in the satanic world that McDonald's with the golden arches, those are the landmarks that speak most to the American, who's mostly obese and eats this Illuminati diet that the devil has convinced him into eating. And the slogan of McDonald's is, you deserve a break today. No, you don't. We don't deserve anything. Only by the grace of God are we living. So we don't deserve anything other than grace. And grace is a difficult concept to understand. It means God's grace. He forgives sins and overlooks them only by his grace. Grace is when he does not punish for a sin. Grace is when he chooses not to render us the punishment according to the work. So grace is the exception. Hence the word disgrace. And when I was in California, I noticed that the car culture, because the car is the central vehicle for the Satanist, like the Gary Newman song, Here in My Car, it's become a car culture, a McDonald's culture, and it's just very sad to see this. And we see all these nail salons and this tremendous vanity, people doing their nails, and the nail is a reference to me being nailed on the cross. And people will say, yeah, but I promise you all of this is true, and everything I say will come to pass. Verily I say unto you, I am his Christ, not one of his Christ. I am Yeshua, as the people in McClay were all saying, Yeshua. Again, that's predictive programming. Again, the California American culture has become this baseball hat wearing of like fans. God doesn't want us to be fans for these teams. He wants us to think of him. But the men of this country are these football fans that ignore their wives and watch sports all day, much to their chagrin. So it's time for everyone to wake up. And God talks about he's going to shave the beards of the world with a razor that is hired, because God hates beards. And you notice now everyone has beards. It's a way to hide from God, as the hat is a way to hide. And the baldness, the endemic, prevalent baldness that's caused, and why 50% of the men are bald, is because of these hats that you're wearing. So it's disrespectful to God to wear these hats. And it's unsanitary to wear these beards. They collect food, they smell, and that's why God says he's going to shave those beards with a razor that is hired. God hates nose rings. He hates these primitive, trashy, whorish looks in people. He hates masks. He hates the masks that everybody's are wearing now, because they show that you don't trust God, that you're cowards. A mask has never worked, to fight a virus or anything, nor will it ever work. And God chooses, he ordains it before time, who is going to live and who is going to die anyway. So also, God hates obesity, and he talks over and over in the Bible about people that are fat. And he hates gluttony. So When people that are overweight say it's because of a hormonal issue, it's not true. It's overeating. And it comes down to diet and exercise. And God doesn't want anyone to suffer. He wants you to eat naturally and not with preservatives. So, I'd been making those videos because I was deluded by those Illuminati medications, which are designed to kill us. They're designed, the antidepressant is actually designed to induce suicide, and that's another huge deception of the Illuminati. I was addicted to those pills for 27 years, and they defiled my conscience, and I was making those videos thinking I was justified. I had no compassion, I had no empathy, and slowly as I began to wake up in the California desert at what I'd done, because I'd quit those pills, but I'm still feeling the effect of those. Also, if you look at the word Messiah, it's mess-sigh, like I've made a mess. What can I do but sigh and say, and look up to God? And God's really, his great miracles that he works, he doesn't do any physical miracles anymore because he's hiding and he's disgusted. But the miracles that he works every day are softening or hardening people's hearts against him or for him. And that's the miracle that he does every day. We notice in the Old Testament that there's a lot of omission, and that there's the New Testament, there's a lot of addition, as per Job, who really Job is gay, and he says over and over at the beginning, I've done nothing wrong. But finally, if you look at Job at the end, he says, okay, I admit my sin. But you'll notice that it's omitted by the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees from the Bible what his sin is. But those friends of his, those pseudo friends, he says, miserable comforters are ye, because God is the only comforter, and I'm the comforter through him. Those friends are his homosexual lovers. So, the Tishbite, those nasty friends of his are really his lovers, and that's his sin. So, while the New Testament is adding all this stuff and presenting me as this satanic Superman rather than the Clark Kent that I am, we can see that the Old Testament has these egregious omissions. And for instance, let me get back to the New Testament, please. You can see that the New Testament has really just been written by man in many cases, because in the epistles, Peter or Paul will say something like, don't gossip and no backbiting. And then at the end of the epistle, he'll say, and I curse Hymenaeus and, Alexander, who did me a lot of harm. So you can see how these saints can't resist gossiping at the end of the epistles, proving that only God is perfect, and proving that the New Testament has largely been poisoned and corrupted. And you'll notice that the devil works through excrement, water, blood, and flies. Like, notice that when one is defecating or in the bathroom or pouring water, there'll be a lot of accidents and spillage because the devil works in those mediums. Flies like experienced fat houseflies. So again, the curse causeless does not come. In my first incarnation, I was killed on the cross for murdering someone in the street. And I won't tell you who it was on those crossroads, but the curse causeless does not come, and that does not exclude me. I'm just a person. So I was crucified on the cross in my first incarnation for murder. God murdered me because God has to stick to his law. Unlike Satan, God always sticks to his word and keeps his promise. Hence, meet you at the crossroads. So please Let's resume now with Isaiah 15, the burden of Moab. And God tells us in Isaiah that Moab will be his washpot and that he will tread down the people of Moab like the mire in the streets. Okay, so let's, resume with Isaiah 15. The burden of Moab. The burden of Moab, because in the night Ar of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence, because in the night Kir of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. He is gone up to Bajish and to Dibon, the high places, to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medeba. On all their heads shall be baldness, and every beard cut off. In their streets they shall gird themselves with sackcloth. On the tops of their houses and in their streets every one shall howl, weeping abundantly. And Heshbon shall cry, and Elealeh, their voices shall be heard even unto Jahaz. Therefore the armed soldiers of Moab shall cry out, his life shall be grievous unto him. And this section, beginning with verse 5, is called A Crying for Moab. And God says, my heart shall cry out for Moab. His fugitives shall flee unto Zoar, an heifer of 3 years old. For by the mounting up of Luhith with weeping shall they go it up. For in the way of Horonaim they shall raise up a cry of destruction. For the waters of Nimrim shall be desolate. For the hay is withered away, the grass faileth, there is no green thing. Which is a reference to A Little Green, the satanic Joni Mitchell song, which I reference in a thing or two about Curtis and Camilla, a thing or two, which is an echo of God saying, I will do a new thing. Therefore the abundance they have gotten, and that which they have laid up shall they carry away to the brook of the willows. For the city is gone round about the borders of Moab, the howling thereof unto Eglaim. For the cry is gone round about the borders of Moab, the howling thereof unto Eglaim, and the howling thereof unto Berelim. For the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood. For I will bring more upon Dimon, lions upon him that escapeth of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. And then we move on to chapter 16, David's throne. Send ye the lamb of the ruler of the land from Selah to the wilderness unto the mount of the daughter of Zion. For it shall be that as a wandering bird cast out of the nest, so the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. Take counsel, execute judgment, make thy shadow as the night in the mist of the noonday. Hide the outcast, bewray not him that wandereth. Let mine outcast dwell with thee, Moab. Be thou a covert to them from the face of the spoiler. For the executioner is at an end, Satan. The spoiler ceaseth. Again, people make fun of me for stammering, but God tells you in Isaiah here that I will have stammering lips and a tongue not my own, because I'm just a person, a sinner, a worthless piece of garbage like all of you. Only God is pure. Again, the extortioner is at an end, the spoiler ceaseth. The oppressors are consumed out of the land. Notice that God uses the present tense because this has already happened. And in mercy shall the throne be established. We know that God rejoiceth in mercy. He loves to forgive. That's the essential element of his personality. As St. Peter says, he believes in redemption, which is the foundation of the universe. That's wisdom. Wisdom is a spirit, Sophia. And in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David. God is speaking about me here. Judging and seeking judgment and hasting righteousness. We have heard of the pride of Moab. He is very proud, even of his haughtiness and his pride and his wrath. But his lies shall not be so. Therefore shall Moab howl for Moab. Everyone shall howl. For the foundations of Kir-Hareseth shall mourn. Shall ye mourn? Surely they are stricken. For the field of Heshbon languish, and the vine of Sibmah. The lords of the heathen have broken down the principal plants thereof. They are come even unto Jazer. They wandered through the wilderness. Her branches are stretched out. They are gone over the sea. And then this section beginning with verse 9 in my Bible, which is a very good Bible. It's the Everyday Study Bible, the King James Version by Holman. God says here, beginning with verse 9, the glory of Moab will end. Therefore I will bewail with the weeping of Jazer, the vine of Sibmah. I will water thee with my tears, O Heshbon and Elealeh, for the shouting for thy summer fruits and for thy harvest is fallen. And gladness is taken away, and joy out of the plentiful field. And in the vineyards there shall be no singing, neither shall there be shouting. The treaders shall tread out no wine in their presses. I have made their vintage shouting to cease. Wherefore my bowels shall sound like an harp for Moab, and mine inward parts for Kir-Haresh. And it shall come to pass, when it is seen that Moab is weary on the high place, that he shall come to his sanctuary to pray, but he shall not prevail. And you notice the word prevail is pre-veil, I being the veil from life to death, from this cursed world until the new Jerusalem. I'm the veil, I'm the separation, I'm the stumbling block. This is the word that the Lord hath spoken concerning Moab since that time. But now the Lord hath spoken, saying, within 3 years, as in the years of an hireling, and the glory of Moab shall be contemned with all that great multitude, and the remnant shall be very small and feeble. And then this section is called the burden of Damascus, beginning with chapter 17. The burden of Damascus, the burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aurora are forsaken. They shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. And in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. And it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn, and reapeth the ears with his arm. And it shall be as they that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim. A man shall look to his maker. This is beginning verse 6. Yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it, as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough, hence 70 berry, 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel. And that day shall a man look to his Maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. And notice how the satanic song, Dear Maker, mocks God here with the word maker. And he shall not look to the altars, the work of his hands, neither shall respect that which his fingers have made, either the groves or the images. In that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bow, and an uppermost branch, which they left because of the children of Israel. And there shall be desolation. Because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. Therefore shalt thou plant pleasant plants, and shalt set it with strange slips. In that day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish. But the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and desperate sorrow. God will rebuke the nations. Woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations, that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee afar off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. And behold, at eventide trouble, and behold, at evening tide trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. Chapter 18. Ethiopia's destruction. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes, upon the waters, saying, Go, ye swift messengers, to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from the beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. All ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye, when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth a trumpet, hear ye. For the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. And I suggest everyone should listen to the Isaiah, and actually the whole Bible, by Alexander Scourby, who reads it much better than I do. For afore the harvest, when the bud is perfect, and the sour grape, we notice that Philip Roth in, I think it's Portnoy, says the Jews, they're sour grape of a religion, meaning they neglect me, the Messiah, and redemption in an afterlife, and have bitterness in their hearts instead of redemption. For afore the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks, and take away and cut down the branches. They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains, and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls shall summer upon them, and the beasts of the earth shall winter upon them. Notice that notice that God has allowed Satan to give me this fake name, Nick Fowler, as a reference to Psalms and Proverbs, where God says that we are escaped from the fowler's snare. In that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of hosts of a people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down under foot, whose land the rivers have spoiled, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion. Now it's chapter 19, the burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof. Notice that midst is a reference to the tree, the garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the midst of the garden. God's always using these words as echoing references to show you that he created all words and that every word will coalesce on the day of destruction, on the day of torment, on the day of anguish when God punishes the world for their iniquity. So again, verse 3, chapter 19, and the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. And the waters shall fall from the sea, the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. And they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up. The reeds and flags shall wither. The paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. The fishers also shall mourn, and all they that cast angle into the brooks. You notice that the word angle is a reference in perversion to angel. They that cast angle into the brooks shall lament, and they that spread nets upon the waters shall languish. Moreover, they that work in fine flax, and they that weave networks shall be confounded. And they shall be broken in purposes thereof, and they shall be broken in the purposes thereof, all that make sluices and ponds for the fish. The failure of the Egyptian wisdom, this section is called, beginning with verse 10. Surely the princes of Zoan are fools. The counsel of the wise counselors of Pharaoh is become brutish. How say ye unto Pharaoh, I am the son of the wise, the son of ancient kings? God asks. Where are they? Where are the wise men? I'll say that again, verse 12. Where are they? Where are thy wise men? And let them tell thee now, and let them know what the Lord of hosts hath purposed upon Egypt. The princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Noph are deceived. They have also seduced Egypt, even they that are the stay of the tribes thereof. The Lord hath mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, even as a drunken man staggereth in his vomit. Neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or tail, branch or rush may do. In that day shall Egypt be like unto women, and it shall be afraid and fear because of the shaking of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he shaketh over it. And the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt. Every one that maketh mention thereof shall be afraid in himself, because of the counsel of the Lord of hosts, which he hath determined against it. In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Lord of hosts. One shall be called the city of destruction. Egypt shall know the Lord. Verse 19, in that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior, and a great one, and he shall deliver them. And the Lord shall be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know the Lord in that day, and shall do sacrifice and oblation. Yea, they shall vow a vow unto the Lord, and perform it. And the Lord shall smite Egypt. He shall smite it and heal it. And they shall return even unto the Lord, and he shall be entreated of them, and shall heal them. In that day there shall be an highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria. And you'll see all this come to pass in the final war that's going to happen very soon. And the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. In that day shall Israel be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance. Chapter 20, the shame of Egypt and Ethiopia. In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod, and took it. At the time spake the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years, for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory. And the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? All praise be to God.